Hey, good afternoon. This is Ralph Mendez, and we're going to be working on chapter 15. And when we talked about chapter 14, we said, well, we're trying to manufacture something, we're making something. What are the main costs we have to keep track of? What are the main things when we build a home, a Toyota truck, processed beer? So let's jump into this. The first big three are right here: materials, labor, overhead. Direct materials, direct labor, and indirect materials and direct labor are part of factory overhead. So put in your direct materials, put in your direct labor. Well, how are we going to determine overhead? There's a tool called a predetermined overhead rate. So we could base it based on materials. We could base it on labor money. We could base on labor dollars. Now, most of the time in manufacturing, the last 100 or so years, we've used labor. But now, as you have more and more robots, like if you're able to go to Toyota manufacturing, they have over 2,500 welds on the truck, and yet 95% of them, I mean, that's like 2,400 of them are all done by robots. So you can't use labor. So as people work in conjunction with robots and things in the future, your overhead application will have to be to try to find the one that most helps you align. Now, in this case, it says overhead to each job at the rate of 40%, 1% of direct materials. So 5,000 times 0.41 is 2,050, and 2,870 and 15,000, 61.5. So now we're saying that this job, the big three, costs this much. Job two, the sum of those materials, labor, overhead is this much. Job three costs this much. Now, look what it says though. 1 and 3 are not finished. 1 and 3 are not finished. So that means at the end of the period, they're not done. Well, what is that called? They're still on work in process. And now, to show you that this real world, here's D.R. Horton, one of the biggest home builders in America, and right here, construction in progress and finished homes. So if the homes are finished, it gets moved to finish home. But if the house is still being constructed, it's called construction in progress. Well, here in accounting, we're calling this work in progress. So this one and this one are still work in progress. So we add up 1 and 3, 80, 96,000. Looks like 896,950. Well, then what's left? What got transferred out to finished goods to sell? 14470. So hopefully job two, there's that. And direct materials. Oh, look what I did. I put 15, so got it all wrong. Got to go back here. Got too many zeros. Too many zeros there. And then that takes 15. So take a zero off here. And then now 16,850 plus 11,250 is 28,1. All because of my math there. So one mistake carries everything through. Finished goods, ready to sell. 1,500 times 0.41 is 615. 615. So now 16,850 plus 5715 is 22,565. So let's see about now. So we have process right, finished goods right, and our job costs right. Okay, let's go on. Now, this one here is going to tie these things together, but let's look at the T accounts. And then you're going to have, like in accounting one, you have T accounts. Well, now you're going to have to use this. Inventory is 44,000. And when is that? At the beginning, 44,000 at April. So we want to put April here. And we want to put April here. And we want to put April here. Okay. All right. So now 44,000. How much was work in process? 9,900. So this is what we have in materials. We're starting off May. We got 44,000 left of materials from last month. We got 9,900 of jobs we haven't finished, and we have $54,000 of finished goods we're trying to sell. All right. So now let's go on. Raw materials we buy 184,000. So we got to go find purchases. Raw material purchases are 184,000. Okay, what else can we use? We got factory payroll, 250,000. But part of the labor is indirect labor. So the direct labor goes here. So let's put this down. Direct labor, see there, indirect labor. So there's indirect labor. So the direct labor goes in work in process, but the indirect labor goes here. So now, yes, we paid 250,000. So how much of it is indirect? The indirect is 57.5. So that means our direct labor is 192.5 and our indirect labor is the 57.5. Remember, if you can't trace it directly to your product, it's indirect labor. All right, now let's see what else they give us. So we have this. Purchases, there's our payroll. We divide it between labor. All right, so now so we're kind of here at it. Well, we can put sales. Sales, they want an income statement too. So again, we're going with what we know. So now this is as much as we know. Now we have to calculate some things because I need the direct materials too. See, work in process, I need to know the direct materials. How much materials got used? And down here are the indirect materials. Well, how do we figure that out? Well, we had 44,000. We bought 184, so we got 228. But how much do we have at the end? 38,000. So how much got transferred out? So 190,000 got used. So watch, 190 got used, and that'll take us down to 38, which is our ending inventory. Well, that works. No, almost, but part of it goes to indirect. So 11 has to go there in 179. So it's still 38 now. So this is the direct materials, and this is the indirect materials. Now, this is our credit, so you have to have a debit. So 179 will be our debit to work in process, and 11,000 will be our debit to factory overhead. So 179 plus the 11 is the 190 combined, and that's how we know what's gone. So that should match. So 44 plus this minus what we used to work in process minus factory overhead leaves 38. All right, now let's follow the same logic with work in process. Our ending number is 19.7. You're missing a number here though. You need factory overhead. You need factory overhead applied. And over here, it's applied. Now, what I mean by that is these are the real costs down here. Money, cash spent for labor, cash for materials. And if we had some other factory overhead costs, do we have any? Yeah, there we go, 115.5. We have some right there. So the real costs are down here in factory overhead. So this is all paid with cash or, accounts payable, but this is an estimate that goes in here. So we apply it based on an estimate. So then you debit work in process and you credit here. All right, so let me just put the end of May. Oh, we'll know here in a minute. Okay. All right, so now how much do we apply? Overhead is applied based on direct labor. What's our direct labor? 192.5 times what? 55%. So labor is 192,000, 55% of that is 105,875. Okay, and then that's how much is here, 105,875. And as you can see, our costs are greater than what we applied. So that means our overhead is underapplied overhead. Okay. So, I mean, we make this estimate based on, our cost and education, but sometimes it doesn't always come out. And later on, we'll have to take this to cost of goods. But for right now, that's how we're going to do it. All right. Now, what did work in process end up at? 19.7. And yet right now you have that many costs. So 487,275 minus 19.7 means 467,000 was finished. So that's our cost of goods manufactured. And where does it go when they're finished? So there's credit and it's debited to our finished goods. Anything where, let's see, what category is that? Finished goods, got one, need one finished goods, cost of goods manufactured. All right, so now we had 54,000, now we finished 467,575 more. And what do we end up finished goods with? Only 34,000. So where do they go if there's only 34? So 521,575 minus 21 equals 500,575 got transferred to cost of goods. They went to cost of goods and they want an income statement. So that's where it would go down here to our cost of goods and cost of goods sold. And then there's our net gross profit. All right, now let's see. So you got to kind of understand the flow. So I'm hoping you're starting to understand the flow here. Oh, somehow I got 21. No, I have the wrong finished goods. It's supposed to be 34. I don't know what I was thinking. I used 21. Okay, so we got to go redo that one. All right, so let's go back. It's going to be 34. So I should have double checked. So let's add this up again. Delete 521,575 minus 34,000 is 487,575. And that's how much is here, 487,575. Now, how about now? All right, so there we go. So remember, you're trying to get the flow. So let's see what else. The journal entries. Record the journal entries for cash. How much did we buy? Raw materials, 184,000. Now, if your rules, what do assets go up on? The left. And what does cash go out on? Cash is credited and assets go up on the left, right? So there you're buying raw materials, 184,000, and that's what we bought. All right. What's next? Record the entry to assign direct materials to cost. Direct materials. The direct materials to the cost. It doesn't say indirect materials. All right, so the direct materials we had that went out was 179,000. Okay, 179,000. View the journal entry, 179,000. They went out of raw materials. And where do they go to? So raw materials are going down. And raw materials go down with a credit, and where do they go to when you're working on something? Work in process inventory. Okay. Now, what about here? So record the entry to assign the indirect cost. Okay. How much were the indirect costs? 11,000. So let's go back to here. Let's see. So 11,000 went to indirect. And where do they, what is it called? Where does indirect labor and where does indirect materials go? Well, it's called factory overhead, and it comes out of raw materials inventory. So let's see how everything looks. So remember, you buy materials with cash or accounts payable, then the direct materials goes into work in process, but the indirect materials go into factory overhead. And if you'll notice, the credit's the same on both of them. They're going out of inventory, either into work in process because it's a direct material, or factory overhead if it's an indirect material. Record the entry for direct labor usage. All right. Direct labor, indirect labor. Well, total factory payroll was 250,000. And you've got to pay people with cash. People want cash. Cash. So what do you call that? Is it wages payable? Factory wages payable. Okay. But then of the 250, how much was indirect? Labor was 57.5. Okay. And again, 250 minus 57.5 is the 192. So this one here is 192 is the direct labor. So what do we call it? Where does direct labor go? Direct labor goes to work it in process. And when you set it up, it's wages payable. And then how about here? The indirect labor goes to, so that again is wages payable. But where does it go here? The indirect labor, factory overhead. So I hope this is starting to make sense to you. Direct material, direct labor goes in work in process. Indirect labor, indirect materials, factory overhead. And then you pay the cash, which is the total amount. Now, journal entries for overhead. Here's where we're applying it. Other factors, including direct materials, record credit to other accounts. So we're calling this factory overhead, but here it says credit to other accounts. And then the amount here was 115,500. All right. Then what do they want here? Record the application of overhead. So now remember, it was 55% of our direct labor, which was 92.5 times 0.55. So we applied 55,000. No, that can't be right. Let's see. Let's go back and check what the indirect labor was. 250 minus the 57.5 of indirect labor is 192,005 times 0.55 is 105,875. So this is our overhead. Remember, the real costs go into factory overhead. So now you're applying it. So you credit factory overhead and you call it goes into the work in process. Okay, so let's see how we did here. All right, so and now let's just review a few things. Y'all are trying to figure out job costing. You see these materials, beginning plus what you buy, and it moves into work in process. Now, what about if it's not, see how indirect materials is down here in overhead? The indirect materials are down there. Direct labor is in work in process, and the overhead is the applied number going in there. Once you finish them, so you spend all this money, and then this is your cost of goods manufactured. When they're finished, they go to finished goods. And then when you sell them, they go to cost of goods sold. Now, here's an example. You see how I have this, you're buying a house over there on Alamo Ranch. You got to add up the direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead to figure out the cost of that house. How much materials, studs, sheetrock, insulation, plumbing, concrete. How much did your employees work? and then apply your overhead, depreciation on the backhoe, depreciation on the skid loader, supervisor, liability, depreciation, rent. So you add up the big three, and then you apply overhead, and that's how you would get the total cost. And then up here, what's liability insurance? That's overhead. What are studs? That's a direct material. What's plywood? If you can trace it directly to that house, sheetrock. So, these are direct materials. What about insulation? How about the plumbing? How about the concrete? Depreciation of the backhoe. Well, now that's overhead. How about the skid loader depreciation? Supervisor salary, equipment insurance, depreciation on tools, rent for the storage building, construction labor. So see, you've got to figure out where they belong. Now, don't forget, it's real world. Finished goods, ready to sell, construction in progress. There's what they call it, D.R. Horton, but we're going to call it work in process. Okay. What's in factory overhead? All these things are in factory overhead. Production supervisor salaries, quality assurance salaries, material management salaries, factory rent, factory utilities, factory building insurance, fringe benefits, depreciation, factory supplies, small tools, insurance, property taxes. Okay. Now, what's the difference? This is a job cost we're talking about today. This is the detailed accumulation of production costs attributed to specific units. So think about houses. Now, what about a beer? If we're making beer, can you really attribute beer to a specific unit? No. So that's why accumulation of costs involving products are indistinguishable. 100,000 gallons of gas, a bunch of millions of barrels of beer. So that's where we use process. So we're doing job costs here, and then we'll talk about process costs in another chapter. So I always dreamed of having a log cabin, you got the mountains, so beautiful. What's the materials? What's the labor? What's the overhead? All right, so very good. So I hope this helped you and with your homework. You have a great day. Bless you.